Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Ms. Pillay?
Thank you, Chairperson. The next witness in the set is the Minister of Higher Education and Training, Dr. Blade Nzimande, and the witness needs to be sworn in, Chair.
Minister, would you, do you have any objection to taking the oath?
No, Judge, I prefer to affirm.
That's fine. What are your full names, please?
My full names are Bonginkosi Emmanuel Nzimande.
It's Dr. Nzimande, is it?
Dr. Nzimande,
Dr.
yes.
Nzimande, would you, do you affirm that the evidence that you will give in this commission will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do affirm, Judge.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Pillay.
Thank you, Chairperson. The structure on which we've agreed with the Minister is that he would speak briefly in introduction, Chair, just make a few introductory remarks. And then there were specific questions posed by the evidence leaders to the Minister by correspondence. And those inquiries relate to 8 specific topics. So the Minister will then address each of the specific topics, and at the end of each topic we will pose questions to the Minister.
That's fine. Minister, when you're ready, you can proceed at your own pace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge here. And the Commissioners, Advocate Ali and Ms. Khumalo. Thank you for the opportunity to come and give evidence before this commission, which as a department we regard as very, very important for the future of post-school education and training in our country. The commission, just by way of background and introduction, posed 8 questions, all interrelated, which the Commission said they would like me to respond to and also reflect upon. At a high level, the focus of the questions relates to the progressive realization of Section 29(1)(b) of the Constitution, and the policy decisions and actions that have been taken by government to realize this right. I will come back to referring specifically just to remind the Commission and others of what Section 29(1)(b) says. Since the establishment of our department, this, of course, the issue of the progressive realization of the right to further education as expressed in the Constitution has been our preoccupation. Though it's not a matter that starts with our department, it's a matter that goes back not only just to 1994, but even prior to 1994, with the establishment of what was known as the Tertiary Education Fund for South Africa, TEFSA, which was established before NSFAS, at the insistence of our late President Mandela, in order to cater for kids from poor families. However, Judge, after the establishment of our department, we actually recognize that a major priority for our country needed to be the development of the full range of education and training to support all out-of-school youth, all out-of-school youth. It was out of this that we conceptualized the idea of talking about a post-school system whose aim is to overcome the structural challenges facing our society. That a large number of young people would face a bleak future if major changes were not introduced. this was highlighted in our green paper, which we published in January 2012. The Center for Higher Education Transformation in 2009 had conducted a study which clearly showed the nature of the problem. The report of the study showed that in 2007 there were 2.8 million people between the ages of 18 and 24 who were not employed, not in some form of education or training, and yet not severely disabled, what we refer to as NEET. This problem was seen to threaten the social stability of South Africa. I then considered this report, and then we said our mandate must be a comprehensive post-school education and training system, of which higher education, or university education to be specific, would only be a part. Now, our mandate also, therefore, out of this, we saw it as not only dealing with the youth who completed school, but also that our mandate must cover youth that left school before completing. In other words, Judge, our mandate is to respond to all those who have left school, whether they've finished or not, whether they went to school or not. That is the mandate of the Department of Higher Education and Training. Within this context, we then said priority actually must be given to technical and vocational education and training sector, as we will describe under our response to question 1. Because our view was that we have a lopsided system. The biggest demand in the country are mid-level skills. Yet you have got a university system that is larger than the college system. That does not mean that university education is not important. I don't want to be misunderstood. Also, as part of emphasis on the TVET college sector, in terms of the huge shortage of mid-level skills, plumbers, electricians, welders, etc., motor mechanics, etc., we then introduced NSFAS, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, for the first time to cover fees for the TVET college students. Now, the department has consistently, I need to say this up front, put in bids like other departments to National Treasury to improve the funding to support students at full cost of study through NSFAS, both at universities and at TVET colleges. After the 2010 NSFAS review, which we did, I submitted a cabinet memorandum to request additional funds and argued that it was essential for government to substantially increase the NSFAS baseline. Now, since 2013, my department has consistently attempted to get sufficient funds to effectively fund all poor students, following the working group report on fee-free higher education for the poor. Maybe I just need to briefly explain here, although you may come back to this, Judge and commissioners. This is the report that normally is said that I sat on it and did not do anything about it. In fact, our bids, since that report came out, were based at trying to reach the kinds of levels that we need to reach. But I will be explaining that later, how also NSFAS substantially increased but still remained inadequate for our purposes. And after the 2015 fees must fall protest, as we will show later, government provided substantive additional funding. And currently also our work is focused on proposing a funding scheme that will also assist both poor and missing middle students to access higher education and TVET opportunities. Work which we hope will come your way, Judge, at some stage, because it's an important dimension of what the Commission is dealing with. Now, let me go to the first question, after which then I will pause. As to what measures have been taken by government to respect, protect, promote and fulfill the right to further education as contained in Section 29(1) of the Constitution. Section 29(1) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa says that, and I quote, "Everyone has the right, A, to a basic education, including adult basic education, and B, to further education, which the state, through reasonable measures, must make progressively available and accessible," unquote. The department and government generally reads the Constitution to clearly articulate that basic education, including adult education, is a fundamental and basic right that must be provided to all who need it, while further education, which can be interpreted as including higher education, also referred to as university education here, and technical and vocational education and training, TVET, are secondary rights that must be made progressively available and accessible to those who merit it, in other words, who meet the academic requirements. Within the remit of the department, of our department, the provision of community education and training gives effect to Section 29(1)(a), namely that everyone has the right to adult basic education, while the provision of TVET and higher education responds to Section 29(1)(b). In other words, that is why we are building a new layer, a new institution, which is we refer to as community education and training colleges. Sometimes, in short, we refer to it as community colleges, to try and realize the right to adult basic education, to escalate what government has been doing. It is noted that Section 29(1) also refers to the provision of school education by the Department of Basic Education, specifically general education and training, which is grades R to 9, which gives effect to Section 29(1)(a, and further education and training, which is grades 10 to 12, which gives effect to Section 29(1)(b). Therefore, to make further education available is interpreted to mean that the system must grow to provide sufficient spaces or opportunities for study. To make it accessible means it should be affordable, and individuals should not be denied access based on financial need, on the basis of a disability or other form of discrimination. Now, what are some of the measures then that government has taken to promote access to further education? Firstly,
Minister, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to understand, would you prefer to do this on a topic-by-topic basis, or do you want to run through all of the topics? Because I think you're moving on to a separate topic now, the next topic.
Oh, I thought that this was still part of, I thought this was still part of 1, which is measures taken by government, and under that we have 1.1, 1.2, and and 1.2 goes a long way, right up to, yes, up to page 13 in terms of my document. But I'm happy to stop here. Whatever you prefer, which would make it easier to deal with my evidence, Judge. I'm in your hands.
Maybe I could kick off, Minister, by just asking you some questions around the interpretation of the constitutional right. Just to begin the discussion, Minister, in approaching the interpretation of Section 29(1)(b), does government see at any level the need to realize the right to further education for all? So in other words, in the context of progressive realization, at some point, realizing the right to further education for all, or do you interpret the right as being circumscribed to only provide further education to those who can't afford it?
Thank you for the question. The way the government has interpreted this is that progressive realization of free higher education for the poor. That has been how government has actually anchored this policy, because in terms of the levels of inequality in our country, and given our history, or who has been deprived the most of access to further education, it has been the poor.
Yes, well, Minister, that can't be right, because once you've given the poor all the education that they require, then your constitutional right will not cease, because the progression still continues, surely. The progression is there to provide further education. And those who don't have further education will be entitled to have it. They may or may not be poor.
Our interpretation, Judge, thanks for the question, is that maybe it lies in the word progressive. And we have given progressive that interpretation that, firstly, we must actually have those who must not fall out of the system if they are academically deserving or capable. Sure. And that is the poor. Yes. But indeed, that does not stop also for that progressive to also begin to include others who may not fall within the category of the poor as defined by government. Just like the current situation now, the poor has been defined at all those who come from households who earn not more than 122,000. And we've been self-critical of this. Is some of the things that we've begun to look at. This 122,000 has been there for ages. But nevertheless, let me not come to that now. To then say also there are those who do not fall within that category, but who still cannot afford, which then is part of realizing Section 29(1)(b) to say there is this category, what do we do with it, which we have defined as the missing middle. I wish we could get a better phrase for that, by the way. Maybe you will help us, Judge, yes, as the Commission, So that is our interpretation, given the means that are at our disposal and the priorities that actually face our country. I
would suppose, though, that even if you have somebody who falls outside of the missing middle, if it is a particularly large family, it may be that that family is not, doesn't find education easy to come by, and that in due course, as part of the progression, those people will be covered too.
Judge, I fully agree with you. We've begun to look into this. For instance, as we were dealing with, we will come to this, with the 2017 fee adjustments. We're saying, if we say, for instance, we will assist all those whose families, we are not going to charge the fee adjustments all those who earn up to 50,000 rands per month. What if that family has got more than one student? Obviously, those are some of the things that should be looked at. If you ask my own personal view, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yes, of course.
Is that actually no one, irrespective of income, should not be able to go somewhere, say to get a loan, even if I'm earning R1 million per annum, to say, but because I'm building a house or I've got other commitments, I want money to educate my child. There should be a place, ideally, where you should be able to go, at the very least, to make a loan. And of course, also, if you have such a system, you can even consider charging interest on a sliding scale, depending on the incomes of people who are actually accessing those loans. Well, that would be part of the progressive realization of Section 29, 1B, Judge.
And if I may ask you, Minister, we know that the state, through its subsidy system for universities, through either block grant or earmarked grants, that it does fund every student enrolled at a public institution, irrespective of whether that student is rich or poor. It does fund them to a certain extent, to the extent that it either provides block grant funding or earmarked funding to a particular institution. Do you see any nexus between the state funding students indirectly, whether they are rich or poor, and the formulation of Section 29, 1B?
Thanks very much, Advocate Pillay. That's a very important issue that we are raising, because it's an issue that normally does not surface. That the block grant and earmark grants, well, block grant generally, earmark grants sometimes may select, but generally they focus in supporting particular areas. Government then funds everybody. There is money that government is paying to fund the running of, say, the universities and colleges, which means that government does fund just beyond the poor, whoever is at university. Because then the question that you are raising helps us to say what we are focusing on here are fees, largely. In other words, the family or student contribution. But there is a relationship. There definitely is a relationship. That is why, as we are talking fees, we have just undertaken as a department, through Mr. Ramaphosa, who is the Deputy President now, before he was Deputy President, a very comprehensive review of the funding formula for universities. Because we realize that you have to deal with the system as a whole in order to be able to address all the problems. We are at the moment modeling that formula as to how it could apply, although some of the recommendations from there, we have started implementing them. E.g., setting aside some funds for historically disadvantaged universities so that they can use those earmarked funds in order to be able to address issues of quality, some other backlogs, and so on. So I'm not so sure, though, whether you wanted me to say anything more than that, but there definitely is a relationship. Because, for instance, it would be of no use to say now further education is accessible to as many people as possible, but they are accessing education into institutions that are falling apart because they are not being adequately funded. It's a very important issue because also it talks to balancing the priorities that we have as government. Let me just make one last example. One unintended consequence of having paid the fee increase this year for everybody by government is that we had to take money that we had earmarked for master's and PhD scholarships to actually produce the lecturers that we need. For example, South African academics now average age is 55 years, Judge. If we do nothing about it, over the next 10 years we'll be in big difficulties. So that amount of money was meant for training especially young South Africans to become academics in our universities. Unfortunately, that money went with fees must fall. But it talks to the point that we are talking about, that much as we may be looking largely at fees here, but we have to look at the system as a whole. It's funding, in other words.
And if I may then turn to a question on fees for the missing middle. We know that the right, at least as it's articulated in the 1996 Constitution, which is the version of 29(1)(b), which you see on the screen now, has been in existence since 1996. And yet the first time we see any concrete measure which addresses the missing middle, who we accept cannot afford university fees. The first time we see such a measure is in 2016. So from that perspective, why did it take that length of time to begin addressing the constitutional rights of the missing middle?
I think that really that had to do with the demand and what government saw as a priority. It's a legitimate question that you are asking, but government thought that we need to rapidly expand access for the poor, which in essence is for the very poor, but who are quite academically capable. That would be my explanation as to why it has taken us so long. And also because of inadequate resources. Even the poor, by the way, we're not funding them adequately. What we normally judge, refer to as historic debt that students talk about, we are owing, and NSFAS students are owing, has been as a result of the fact that there's been top slicing of NSFAS in many of our institutions. Let me give a concrete example. It's just an example. You have a university that says in terms of its projections, we're going to take 1,000 students who will require NSFAS support. But because of the demand for access, the university ends up taking 1,300. Yet, it means then it will have to split money meant for 1,000 students now amongst 1,300 students. Which means then these NSFAS students we are supporting, they're carrying not the full cost of study. They are not being assisted for the full cost of study. And then they start accumulating this other debt, which they are expected to pay, but they cannot pay. That's another problem we've been having for a long time, which we then began to address after the establishment of our department. Because in 2011, DG, if I'm not mistaken, through you, Judge, 2012, we paid this kind of debt for NSFAS students for 2010, 2011. And then this year, we've paid now for 2013, 2014, 2015, and ensure that for 2016, they don't accumulate this new debt. We fund them fully. So that has been the pressure point, really, that the numbers of poor students who qualified for NSFAS have just been so big that we had not really been able to even cover that fully. So it's a question of competing imperatives. But now the reason why I think the issue of the missing middle has become worse, it's because the 122,000 means has been there for a very long time. And that increasingly some of the students really that we categorize as belonging to the missing middle, they are poor students actually. If you come from a family that is earning 150,000 rand per annum, you can't really afford, say, university or even college fees for that matter. So that would be my explanation as to what is it that has happened. Well, also maybe thanks to Fees Must Fall for actually highlighting this issue and its urgency.
We'll turn in a short while, Minister, to the question of the government's response to the Fees Must Fall movement. But may I just finish this the questioning on this topic with reference to students who do qualify for NSFAS, who we accept to be the really poor students because they fall within the means test. As you've indicated, the NSFAS allocations to even these very poor students has historically been inadequate and to meet the demand of poor students. And for that reason, universities have been top slicing, etc. Does this then mean, Minister, that government has been in breach of its obligations under Section 29(1)(b) in respect of those poor students? Because it hasn't been able to fully comply with its obligation to fund those poor students, their right to further education.
Judge, I wouldn't put it that way, that government has been in breach. Because also these matters are also based on affordability. They are also based on other very pressing, competing government priorities and how we then slice up the money that is in the fiscus. Right now, we are sitting with a challenge of implementing the National Health Insurance. We've had to build houses as government for the poor, unprecedented in the world that in 20 years any government has built more than 3 million houses and given them for free to poor people. It hasn't happened in any other country between 1994 and 2014, for instance. Social grants that have played a very crucial role in cushioning the poor from what could have been worse forms of poverty. We are not saying that we are not having poverty. So within that context, therefore, government says, well, this is what we have, this is how far we can go. Because socio-economic rights in the Constitution are very important. I'm not saying that we should underestimate that. Because this issue we are dealing with actually highlights the issue of socio-economic rights. But it's the question of affordability, and ability of government to be able to pay that. I think maybe then we need to ask a broader question, which I hope that the commission judge will be able to ask and provide an answer. Where else is there money in this country that can be able to assist for us to be able to realize Section 29(1)(b) for larger and larger numbers of people who are actually deserving?
And that raises the question of prioritization, Minister, which we will get to in the course of the morning. Perhaps you'd like to move on to your second topic then, Minister.
Yes, thank you very much. I will try not to read everything that is here. I think that would help. I hope that it doesn't disturb those who are following it there. So I'm on 1.2 now as to what measures we have taken. Firstly, the creation of the new Department of Higher Education and Training was one very important measure taken by government to say, look, one Department of Education too big to be able to deal with the scale of the challenge that face us. So our department then was established in 2009 in order, I would argue, to focus on 29(1)(b) of the Constitution in a much more dedicated way. We also then undertook a very comprehensive process of saying, what is our department supposed to do? And that led to the white paper on post-school education and training, which was published in November 2013 after approval by Cabinet. As I have said, I don't want to repeat, the post-school education and training system is our focus, and we must provide for school leaving youth who are entering higher education or TVET colleges, as well as out-of-school youth who dropped out before grade 9. I will come back to the issue of unemployed youth, because also unemployed youth, insofar as they would like to acquire a skill, or some further education, they are our responsibility as well. Our post-school education and training system, I'm sure that the department must have taken you through this. It comprises 26 universities.
Minister, just to assure you that we have had both a presentation by your DG and evidence from
Sure.
functionaries within the department.
So I'll just
dealt with
highlight
this.
the measures. Thank you very much. Now, the measures that we've taken thus far in respect to each of the sectors, very briefly. On technical and vocational education and training, I'm not going to tell you about the history, but the most important thing is that if we look at firstly, let me just summarize this. In the creation of our department, the President said, if we are to give adequate attention to this sector, it must fall under our department and become national competence rather than provincial competence, so that it is able to be better aligned with other institutions that are operating at national level, like, for instance, relationship with the university system, the college sector to the university system, and relationship with the sector education and training authority. We've done quite a lot here, which I am sure the department has actually taken through you. We have a very comprehensive turnaround strategy for TVET colleges. Focus being that we would like to make these colleges to be colleges of choice, rather than third-grade colleges meant for those who can't go to university. Because we believe that most of the skills that are needed by the country can actually be able to be acquired through TVET colleges. As I have said, that is why we have expanded NSFAS such that now just over 50% or around 50% of those who go to TVET colleges do not actually pay tuition fees through NSFAS. And that also, we have more than doubled the intake between 2009 in the enrollments to about from 350,000 to 710,535 in 2015. Those are 2015 figures. But we must say, though, that despite this, the issue of funding for TVET colleges is a big issue for us. Though we are building new campuses, 12, in the most rural area, in rural areas where there's never been a post-school institution. The 12 is still not enough, but it's our kind of focus to begin to say we would like that this kind of mid-level training is available also to youth from the rural areas. Now, I don't know, through you, Judge, if evidence leader would like me to move on to higher education or would like to pause at this stage.
I think I just have one question for you, Minister, on the question of the TVETs. You indicate that approximately 50% of learners within the TVET sector are fully funded through NSFAS, in the sense that they don't pay tuition fees.
No, not fully. Well, they are fully funded tuition fees.
Yes.
But not other needs that they may have. For example, you know the original plan about TVET colleges, even under apartheid, was that at least there should be a campus in every district, which is still our goal as government as we move forward. And therefore you'll find that many of these, some of them were technical high schools, never had residential facilities for students or transport facilities for students. So what we then do is that for the students that we pay their tuition fully, some of them we assist, 15% of them, let me put it that way, of those that we assist, we also help them either with accommodation or with transport. But that is far from adequate. So that is why one of the biggest areas that require attention is actually the funding of the TVET colleges.
Now, at present, Minister, we know that the TVET sector attracts the really poor students. Now, in those circumstances, has government applied its mind to how students who do not get fully funded through NSFAS or do not get full funding in the sense that it doesn't cover accommodation, transport, allowances, etc., how those students can obtain funding or access funding?
We have consistently been, Judge, putting bids through Treasury, together, of course, with other departments, highlighting the fact that if government is even serious about achieving many of its goals in the National Development Plan, we won't achieve those unless there is significantly increased funding for TVET colleges. There is that understanding in government. The issue is, how then do we reprioritize such that we are able to get more money? We have in place a system to be able to roll out, to expand, to roll out. You know, we need infrastructure, of course, in a big way to build more campuses. I mean, the demands we have as a department, just about half the mayors in South Africa have called me. I'm not exaggerating, you know. Or if they've not called me, we meet in meetings, you know, in conferences and so on. Nzimande, I need a college in my area. There isn't, because just of the demand. The demand is really huge. But that is positive also because, unlike before, people now are beginning to ask for TVET college campuses. Unlike before, that they were seen as just places that are not worth going to.
Just to understand your answer, and I'm really probing what happens to the poor student in a TVET college who does not get full funding through NSFAS. How does that poor student whose family can't afford to pay fees, how does that poor student access funding to top up what's left over?
Let me say this, that, Judge and Commissioners, we've made a huge difference by extending NSFAS to colleges. Because there was no NSFAS before our department at colleges. Hence also the growth. You know, to double in about 5 years, the numbers actually shows that there's attraction and we are beginning to make the difference. Of course, Advocate Pillay, you are right. The situation is not good for those students who cannot afford. It is not good. I do wish to actually admit that, you know, at TVET colleges. That is why everything possible needs to be done to also expand this. And I was hoping, Judge, I'm hoping that in your work and recommendations, really this must be an area also that needs to be given equal attention, because if we don't do that, we're going to continue unwittingly only funding the university sector at the expense of this sector.
What do you say about the fact that there are 627 private institutions providing college education?
They are filling a gap, Judge. They are really filling a gap. Some of them, they are really filling an important gap and also providing access and offering good quality programs. But at the same time, you really have fly-by-nights.
Yes.
that are robbing students. We try to chase them with the police every year. Unfortunately, our criminal justice system seems not to prioritize this as a crime, that people are actually just giving students unregistered programs. As a department, we are making all the effort also to make information accessible and to people say, before you enroll, please check with our department whether that college is not only properly registered, but on whether it is registered for the programs that it is actually offering. So as I say, Judge, some are filling an important gap. Even they offer programs that are not found in public colleges.
From the perspective of the students enrolled at TVET colleges, the poor students enrolled at TVET colleges. Just want to ask you a question from the perspective of the colleges themselves. Now, you've testified that the funding is approximately 80%, they're 80% funded, but in reality that is actually 53% of late. The government hasn't been able to meet the 80% funding limit. Now, we know, and we've had before us presentations by the TVET governors, which demonstrates that the colleges have little or no, what we understand to be third stream income, or what in a higher education context is third stream income. Now, in those circumstances, how are the colleges expected to make up the shortfall?
Thank you. Firstly, as I have said, we continue to ask for money from the fiscus as the department. We won't stop doing that because we also think that much as third stream income is always important, but if we are to really stabilize and grow the system, we need stable funding from the fiscus, which is quite significant. But there are other initiatives that we have taken. Maybe the DG and the department might have, you will indicate to me, might have indicated this to you. We've actually tried to bring the sitters closer to the TVET colleges. We think that is very important because when we inherited the sitters from the Department of Labor in 2010, strictly speaking, we found that a lot of the programs and training programs by the sitters, more than 90% were offered through private providers. We are not saying private providers do not have a role to play, but it can't be that, you're talking about 8-9 billion rands of training money that is spent exclusively on private providers. We then said to the TVET colleges and the sitters, come together. Sitters must also help the TVET colleges to develop programs that the sitters and employers actually need, so that these are offered through the TVET colleges, and in that way TVET colleges are able to access the levy monies to be able to run their other programs. And even some colleges are doing well, others not so well. But that's another way of actually raising third stream income. But the other way of raising third stream income, Judge, is getting TVET colleges to be closer to employers. Because a number of employers themselves have got training and other human resources needs that we know that colleges can offer. So those are some of the ways, but as I say, the balance for us would still be that a larger proportion will need to have to come from the fiscus, so for the mainstream running of the colleges.
Minister, in the context of the chronic underfunding of the TVET colleges, which you've described this morning, one of the facts which became very apparent to us and is one which I have to raise with you is around the funding of the 0% increment decision, the decision that there would be no fee increment in 2016. And we know that one of the measures used to fund the effect of that decision was to utilize money that it was CETA surplus money that was destined for TVETs. Now, in the context of what you described this morning, do you see that decision as being a justifiable decision, that money that was earmarked or going towards TVET support was redirected to compensate or to offset the effect of the 0% increment decision in the context of higher education?
Judge, I should have apologized from the beginning. I've got some flu, so I hope that I won't leave it here to everybody.
Too late, Minister, too late.
So my apologies. By the way, through you, Judge, Advocate Pillay, I should have said the National Skills Fund also has been giving quite a lot of money to colleges. For instance, we have allocated this financial year 2.56 billion for occupational programs that must be dealt with. Judge, this question is really at the heart of the challenges that face post-school education. As I indicated, I didn't feel happy that we had to take more than R1 billion, I don't have the exact figure now, from the National Skills Fund to fund university students' fees. It's good for university students, but it's unjust for TVET college students and for the unemployed, because a lot of money we pump into training, including learnerships and internships for the unemployed youth so that they can improve their prospects of at least getting a job. Now, I don't want this, though, to be misinterpreted as if I'm saying it's not important to fund university education. But the question does arise. If we have got this amount of money in the fiscus, this question is very important. How should we be spreading it? In other words, the issue of prioritization is going to be very important where we do not have all the money. Let me also raise another issue that we don't talk about. We fund every student who qualifies, well, not every, most of the students who qualify, except this year, we took every student who qualified for NSFAS, even where the universities didn't have money, or the colleges, and that's the money we are going to be able to, we will have to raise as government. So we support all these NSFAS students, but we don't ask the question, or we ask it, but we are not able to deal with it because of the pressures of access. Are we spending this money wisely? Are we funding NSFAS according to the skills priorities of the country? Frankly, we're not, because we take everyone who qualifies for NSFAS, irrespective of the program that that particular student is going to come into. At some stage, we will have to confront that question. Instead, as part of dealing with that, we've taken money from the National Skills Fund and said, for those students who are going into scarce skills at universities, engineering, actuarial science, accountant, etc., we give those bursaries as part of trying to correct this anomaly. We also then are giving money for occupational programs, as I have said, for TVET colleges, so that we increase the production of artisans. Those are some of the questions that will have to feature into our plans going forward in terms of, yes, we fund the poor, yes, we want to progressively expand and assist others, but how do we do that also in a manner that supports skills priority for economic development in our country?
Morning, Minister. I just want to check on the investment on the occupational curriculum. Are we confident that after that has been given, we're able to place them in the workplace? once that funding has been there, and what assurance and what partnerships are in place for that?
Thanks, Commissioner Kumar. The issue of placement is one of the top priorities in the department. In fact, we have said you can't have a post-school education and training system that is functional unless it also addresses the issue of workplace exposure, especially for colleges, as you say. That is why, in order to improve that, it's still a big challenge because, by the way, South African employers, and I hope that maybe they will be invited here before the Commission. South African employers largely are spoiled, and they were spoiled by apartheid, really. They just have no experience of workplace, unlike a place like Germany, Switzerland, where employers take it as their duty to actually get young people to do internships and learnerships and apprenticeships because they are training for themselves. South African employers in the past, it was the parastatals which were training mainly white artisans, but the rest of the South African employers, they are not doing that. Now, one way of trying to do that, we have restructured SITA funding, which, by the way, some of them are taking me to court for that, so that we release more monies for TVET college students, for University of Technology students to be guaranteed at least 12 months placement after completion in a workplace. That has made some improvement. I must say I don't have the figures with me here, but since this department was established, there's been significant improvement, but it still remains a big challenge to actually place. That is why also we still find people being skeptical about TVET colleges and say, yeah, but we know some of the youngsters here in the neighborhood who have gone to TVET colleges, but they are actually sitting at home. So those are some of the measures that we have tried to put in place of internships and learnerships and apprenticeships in order to improve employability.
Minister, just a final question on the TVET colleges before you move on to higher education. And I pose this question to you in the context of the NDP, which seeks to turn TVET colleges into institutions of choice, and which seeks to invert the pyramid so that you have greater enrollments at TVET colleges. Now, in the context of the chronic underfunding and in the context of little or no third stream funding, we know that in terms of the 2015 norms and standards, that there's fee capping in respect of TVET colleges. Now, in the context of fee capping, little or no third stream funding, and then obviously underfunding from NSFAS, how are TVET colleges expected to convert themselves into institutions of choice?
Firstly, we changed the name FET to TVET. It wasn't just a name change. What we were saying was actually giving these institutions not so much a new mandate, but to focus them on their mandate that we felt had not been adequately carried out before. As I have said, firstly, build closer relations with employers. You can't be a TVET college if you don't have close relations with employers in the vicinity of a college. Of course, rural areas, they pose certain challenges. For instance, if you take a place like Durban and compare it to, if you're talking KZN, Mtubatuba, a college that's located in Durban has got a better chance than a college that is in Mtubatu. Because then we hope colleges will be able to raise resources by so doing. And also, we are helping colleges to build capacity to spend SITA monies. Because the irony is that quite a number of them, they fail to spend the SITA monies. They end up becoming like middlemen, and it's often men, Judge. it's not women often or middlemen. We say, develop this skill to provide this particular program. Then they go and get a private provider to come and do it, and then they take the money from the SETA, they pay the private provider, and they take their cut, whilst they aren't developing the skill. So we are trying to assist the colleges to have the capacity to be able to develop these skills provisions that are actually required by industry. That is another way that we then want to. But we think that most importantly, if we can be able to guarantee every TVET college graduate, or at least 70%, that they will find a job once they complete, they will then begin to become colleges of choice. That is a challenge, and that is the work that we are actually trying to do with all the role players. By the way, I mustn't be seen to be overly harsh on the private sector. There are some employers who are really working, doing very good work with us, you know, and some of them, by the way, are German, Swiss companies that have got operations here, who we are experimenting with their system from there and see how we can actually begin to build it from here. I hope, Judge, that does attempt to answer.
Minister, there seems to be this challenge, and the challenge has been there for some time in respect of this particular sector, the TVET sector, and work-based learning and so forth. Now, I'm not sure how long NEDLAC has been in existence. Have these discussions, because NEDLAC, as I understand it, deals with government, labor, business groupings. Has this discussion not taken place at that particular level in terms of assisting you in your mandate of educating and providing skills in the country?
Yes, Advocate Ali, we have engaged NEDLAC quite extensively. One of the engagement led to the signing, you will remind me what year it was, what is known as the National Skills Accord. And the National Skills Accord has got a number of agreements. One of those agreements is placement. By the way, placement not just of students. We also emphasize, which was something we requested from our department, placement of lecturers. Because that is where also we've been having a challenge with TVET colleges. You find a lecturer who teaches, for example, public relations, but has never been in a public relations environment, whether in the private sector or in government. It's just teaching theory. So we have had an agreement. We've made numerous presentations at NEDLAC and also have this National Skills Accord. Sometimes, though, the challenge with institutions like NEDLAC is that you interact with an association of employers. So we have decided that we're going to do it both ways. We're going to interact there, but also we are actually also going to approach individual companies as well. Because sometimes just to limit yourself at the level of a federation of companies, you don't really reach to individual companies.
Minister, just to get back to the question of the fee capping in the TVET sector, just want to understand the rationale for fee capping in that sector, but the lack of an equivalent of that in the higher education sector. So in other words, no fee regulation in the higher education sector, particularly given the fact that NSFAS pays in that sector, in the higher education sector, it funds students per capita. So irrespective of the fees that a university pays, NSFAS would fund the fee charged by an institution. So why do you have fee capping in the TVET sector and no fee regulation in the higher education sector?
Judge, I'm not so sure if I understand what is meant by fee capping in the TVET sector. Do you mean that fee capping by the department? as to how much fees they can increase.
That's correct, yes, in the norms and standards.
Yes. Maybe I will ask the DG to assist me with your permission, Judge, on that detail. But what I want to say on the university sector is that we agreed last year, after the university vice-chancellors requested to have a meeting with the president. I think that was October last year. Just a week actually or so before the fees must fall protest started, that we identified this issue of fee increases at universities as something that is becoming a political hot potato, even before the fees must fall. And we agreed out of that process that this thing of universities, yes, they are autonomous, but of just increase. One university would increase fees by 7%, another one by 8%, another one by 10.5%, was causing a lot of problems in the system. So the universities themselves voluntarily, in engagement with us, agreed that we must now determine a regulatory mechanism. And they gave that task to me, but we agreed that so that it has got credibility. Sometimes ministers are seen as not being fair and neutral and objective. I regard myself, Judge, as being one of those most objective ministers and so on. But I said, fine, since you don't quite trust me, I'll go to the Council for Higher Education to then help us develop a regulatory mechanism. That's what the CHE is doing at the moment, and I've asked them to give me that proposal by the end of this year. But I'm not so sure, Judge, through you, if I understand the fee capping with TVET colleges. That's why I'm requesting the assistance of the DG on that detail.
Minister, before we get back to the capping in the TVET colleges, if I may just ask you
Yes.
about the fee regulation in higher education. Perhaps you could just enlighten us as to what it is that the substance of what the CHE is considering and how that will impact the payment of fees in the higher education sector.
Judge and commissioners, I'm not so sure if I can be able to answer that question authoritatively for now, before the CHE comes to me on what it is considering. I can only do maybe possibly an extrapolation from this report they gave me to advise me about what needs to happen about the 2017 fee adjustments. Because I said to them, give me two reports, 2017 by middle of this year, which they did, the fee adjustments for 2017, but then for the regulatory framework that is complete, give that to me by the end of the year, which they haven't, of course, because the deadline has not yet reached. But for this 2017, what they considered is this issue of what is called the Higher Education Price Index. That usually the Higher Education Price Index is often 2 percentage points higher than the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. There is a debate about that. But I know that that's actually one of the serious considerations that they will have to take into account. But also, I am sure what they will also have to take into account is that the fees in our universities, they are so varied. They are so varied. What's our cheapest university? 50,000? 55,000, we can check that, Judge. But then our most expensive university is 120,000. There is that issue that is being raised. Why this difference? I think it's something that we will have. Of course, it's historical also. We must take that into account. It's historical, in terms of better resourced universities. We're tending to offer better quality education, also able to attract better quality lecturers and so on, leading then perhaps to these disparities that we have. But as I'm saying, I'm extrapolating. That can only be some of the issues. But I will be able to know for sure and also be able to interrogate that when I actually receive a report from the Council for Higher Education.
If I may just ask, Minister, just in respect of the instruction to CHE as to the kind of regulatory mechanism you're looking for, is it in relation to fee regulation across the board or fee regulation as it affects students who qualify for NSFAS funding?
No, it's fees across the board, Judge. It's for all the universities. It's for all the universities because also it's focusing on the for everybody. It's not just for those who qualify for NSFAS. The issue of what we do with poor students, of course, is a subject to be dealt with by this commission.
Just on going back to the TVET, Minister, I just wanted to check with efficiencies in the governance structure. What's the speed into to lining up, so to speak? Because I understand the PSA is contradictory. Maybe the principals are reporting to the council or to the department. Is there any speed into improving those efficiencies if they affect the ultimate running of or the autonomy of the colleges?
Yes, Judge, that is one matter that we are dealing with at the moment. We've not just started now. We started as we were working towards the migration of the colleges. That was one of the issues that were placed very high on the table, because also migration has involved changing of the conditions of employment of many of the staff at the colleges. Many of them who were employees, like private employees of the colleges, are now on the mainstream payroll of the civil service in PESA. There are challenges there, as you say, Commissioner Kumalo, but we are dealing with those. We are working with the unions, we are working with the college principals, we are working with the governing councils in discussions and negotiations in order to finalize this. Of course, guided by also the public sector bargaining regime, because also there is a tension which bargaining council should, which workers at the TVET colleges be there. But we are working on that because we are quite keen, as you point out, that we stabilize governance in our colleges, because if we don't do that, we won't be able to achieve many of the goals that we have set for the colleges.
Are you ready to move on to your next topic then, Minister?
Yes, I am prepared, Judge. That is higher education. Now, our higher education has for a while now been guided by what we refer to as White Paper number 3, a program for the transformation of higher education, which was adopted by Cabinet in 1997, published in 1997, which then was given effect through various pieces of legislation. And also we know that our university system in the early to mid-2000s underwent a huge transformation in terms of merging institutions and creation also of renaming of your old technicons into becoming University of Technology. But by 2007, the public system had grown substantially, especially through distance education. And also continued growth of the system has resulted in university enrollment increasing from 495,356 in 1994 to 969,154 in 2014. This figure is very important, Judge, because I'm not so sure if there are that there are many university systems in the world that has grown this fast. To actually double university in 20 years is quite significant. That is also part of the source of the problem that we are dealing with now. Because the university system grew faster than the resources government was able to give in order to support the system. Whether, because of that, which is the most important thing that perhaps we also need to be saying, it became a system that is highly dependent on student fees. Because the less government funding, the more universities want to get more money from student fees by increasing student fees. Although the way I put this, I say we are victims of our own success because we've really grown the system and changed its demography in a very, very impressive way for the first 20 years. Now, the most important mechanism through which we've been able to support our university system has been through the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which we have already spoken about in terms of supporting largely students from poor backgrounds, but who are academically deserving. Now, our system also has got private institutions, private higher education institutions. You will notice that the private higher education institutions, we don't call them universities because we are not keen to actually allow private universities in our country on a full-blown scale because that may pose a very serious threat to our public system. If you gave to an Oxford...
But Minister, on that, perhaps you can expand on
Yes.
that. The Constitution makes provision in Section 29 for private institutions to be established. So I'm just wondering whether one must be careful of saying we don't want threats from the private institutions. If we've got good quality public institutions, then there should be no threat, and rather that they complement each other at the end of the day. It is where perhaps the private institutions, as they're now doing through this commission, come and ask whether they can be funded also from the purse of the minister. Then perhaps you can. But to say that threat without qualifying, perhaps you can expand on what you were trying to say.
Thanks, Advocate. Through you, Judge. Well, the Constitution doesn't talk about private universities. It talks about private or independent educational institutions. We are stringent about the criteria for a university because a university must also have minimum provision of certain things. So many schools and faculties, such standards and so on. Most of the private institutions that are operating here do not meet that criteria, but we are also upfront. We are not very keen on that. Yes, private institutions can provide programs that are not offered in the public system. But we need to be cautious also that we protect the public, particularly in a poor and developing country. This also is lessons that we have learned from other countries. Many African countries now, they say, hey, how did we do this? Because we are really in trouble now. Some of these private institutions are not up to scratch. I'm not saying that all of them. In some instances, they have caused the rise in the cost of university education. Some of them that are good, they steal our best academics. And they are now taking your wealthier students. We need the wealthy students in our public system because they pay. They actually provide the kind of support that we need. I'm aware now that we are under huge pressure. There are people who want to come and establish private medical schools. We are very reluctant as government, together with the Minister Mtswaledi, because of some of the negative implications of such private institutions, that they have for the public system. But I suppose they advocate that's a matter for ongoing debate for us. I don't know for you, as a commission, you have to debate and reach some conclusions at some point.
The only reason I raised it, Minister, is it has been raised in this commission where the private institutions say they are regulated because they need to apply for accreditation and so forth. But their view has been, we have a problem that you cannot cater, and they use the NDP targets. In order for you to have 1.6 million in 2030, you're going to have a problem. You don't have enough infrastructure and so forth, and so the argument goes. And then they then indicate, well, why don't you make use, like you have private institutions in basic education that are subsidized, why you cannot have the same system in higher education? I'm just giving you what they have come with. The question has been posed to them, well, in the first instance, in respect of basic education, it's an obligation on government to provide that. The Constitution somewhat phrases it differently when it comes to higher education, independent, as you put, I say, private education, private higher education institutions, has phrased the right differently. And whether government should then take it upon themselves to be funding is the debate.
Through you, Judge. No, it's an important question. But now the reality that is facing government is this. The demand in the public institutions to fund and to support students who cannot afford is so huge, which is perhaps why we are where we are in this space, that we feel it would be unjust to actually fund students in the private sector. However, this is a matter that will require further consideration, because some of the problems we are faced with as a department, we get approached by students who want to do a program that we need in government, but is not offered in any of our public institutions. But because our policy says, for instance, NSFAS and other forms of assistance, we fund students who are in public institutions, we unfortunately have to say no. Much as we need these programs, there are some very good private institutions that are in this country. But much as we need this program, but we cannot afford, some of them are very expensive, of course. But it's an issue that will have to be considered. That as we get, hopefully, more resources, we can then be able to say, where government needs a program but it's not offered in a public institution, we will pay, say, for a certain number of students so that they are able to actually do that. But funding them as the same as we do in the public institutions, that's not on the agenda, unfortunately, at this point in time.
But is there scope, Minister, for, in the reforms, the potential reforms to the NSFAS model, is there scope for students to get NSFAS funding when they are enrolled at private institutions?
Judge, not now, the way I see it. Unless then NSFAS can in future become so rich by getting more money from some, we can then be able to do that. But it is a question that is well worth it. Again, it's the issue of progressive and priorities. It is a question that is well worth engaging. For example, as I was saying earlier, if we have got a loan system for anyone, for education, it should be possible that you can go to a bank or whatever loan system is there and get a loan and be able to go to any institution that you want to, whether public or private. So it is an issue that will have to be interrogated and also be factored into. The issue is how fast can you move into that, how much resources can you get, and so on.
Just Minister, follow up on that. The SETA Scarce Skills Fund, does it limit that? Is it only for the public institutions? If it is, if that scope is to be created, what legislative framework needs to be amended in that regard?
No, the SETAs, I don't think they are limited. The SETAs are often guided by where will they get the kind of training and skill that is required by their respective industries or sectors in which they operate. Here I am talking principally about NSFAS, specifically. It's NSFAS, which is money that comes from the NSFAS and is meant for supporting poor students. Government policy has been, we are supporting students who are in South Africa to begin with, who are studying in South Africa and also studying through the public institutions. But the SETAs have not been limited to that. That is why I said earlier, in fact, we had to try and redirect some of the SETA funds to also be used in the public sector as a way of subsidizing the public sector rather than using that exclusively in the private sector.
So, Minister, the SETA money that is distributed through NSFAS, does it automatically take the distribution policy of NSFAS, or it's treated as a SETA money?
It takes the policies of NSFAS. The money that they put through NSFAS, it's actually following the NSFAS model. Unless I'm wrong, DG. The DG is saying, Judge, that I'm right. That it for the money, but SETAs do not put all their monies through NSFAS. I also need to make that clear. Some of the monies they spend outside of NSFAS to actually support other training programs, you know, that they need according to the needs of their own sectors. And based on their policies, yes. Oh,
I'm sure you may want to just summarize that paragraph.
yes. Now, insofar as supporting higher education within the context of 29(1)(b), making higher education progressively available. As I've said, we've doubled our enrollment since 1994. We have a hugely transformed student population, substantial funding for NSFAS, which is 1.5 million now since it started at universities, 1.5 million students. and of course 1.1 million in TVET colleges. One of the things we are proud of, we've built the 2 new universities. Not enough, but very important, as part of expanding University of, and the third one, of course, being the Sefako Makgato Health Sciences universities. In other words, in short, if there is one area that we can really be proud of as this government, is that much as more needs to be done, the fact that NSFAS has supported now 2.6 million students, overwhelmingly students who come from families who have never set a foot in a college or a university. In fact, Judge, I'm an academic by background. If I were to go back to academia, one of the research topics I would do would be the extent to which NSFAS has contributed to the growth of the black middle class in South Africa. I have no doubt that possibly it has been the single most contributor to the building of a black middle class. Kids who otherwise would not have accessed university or college education. Now, of course, when we are deep in winter, we tend to forget how summer feels like. Like now, because we are faced with these protests, in the middle of them, we tend to forget how much government has done to progressively provide university education for children from poor families in this country. Obviously, it's not enough, and that's why this commission is here, Judge.
Just very briefly on the NSFAS model, Minister, one of the big complaints raised by these students who have made presentations before us is that the current NSFAS model, and we leave aside the 2017 pilot for a second, that the current model is based on the contingency loan system. And they say that to require poor students to pay back once they employed gainfully is inherently unfair and very onerous on those students.
Well, I think those voices need to be engaged and be listened to. That's the attitude of government. That there is a point in that. But again, as a poor country, and remember, by the way, higher education also gives you access to a better life often. So there's a private benefit apart from public good that we provide skills. Then we say in a poor country like ours, those who have been assisted must be able to plow back. Many other countries actually do that. Now, the issue maybe that requires debate is who should pay back, who should not pay back. That issue government has been dealing with. That is why NSFAS actually is not purely a loan system. It's got a bursary or a grant component, which is 60-40, 60 loan, 40% grant. It can even changes to be 40-60, something that we introduced. One of the annexures that to this document, I think it's Annexure A, talking about NSFAS. One of the things we introduce is that final year students who are on NSFAS, if they pass all their courses, that whole year gets converted into a bursary. They don't have to pay it back, as part of also of incentivizing the students. Trying to strike a balance that you don't come out with hugely indebted student population from graduates from poor families. But there is maybe a place for a debate. Do you also ask the poorest of the poor to pay back? or you only ask people who come from certain categories of families. Although also some people say that may not be a fair criteria, because you may find a student who comes from the poorest of the poor but gets qualified in a field that pays lots of money. So there is that question. Even also there is a debate on whether you shouldn't, for certain categories of the poorest of students, instead of saying pay back when you start earning, why don't you do community service like the medical doctors are doing? They pay back through the 2-year community service, which, by the way, also has got lots of advantages, because that gives you the very important work experience that is required. But those are issues that actually require debate. As of now, as a country, we are saying we are a poor country. Those that have been assisted must pay back so that those who come after them can be able also to access higher education.
Thanks, Minister. Can I just check on paragraph 8? After discussing the realization of this right, and then you said, but clearly it's not enough. What would be enough? What would be the full realization if everything was normal, or it was to be fully realized with the resources and everything? What would be the ideal situation then?
The ideal situation would be to support fully well, so far the government policy is loans. All NSFAS deserving students. But also we have to adjust the NSFAS qualifying means test. We definitely have to change this 122,000. It's just too low. So as to where it would be, I suppose that's something that I hope the Commission might be able to also assist us there. At least all those NSFAS qualifying category to be able to pay them, that they don't pay any fee up front. And that those who also then cannot afford but fall outside that category are able to access some kind of loan or assistance or a mix of a loan and bursary, so that they are able to actually complete. So should it be for colleges, not just for universities. And also the allowances that are needed. Now, that's part of the ideal. Because the problem also here, Judge, is not just money. There is another matter that we must not lose sight of. 55% of students who start university in South Africa, they do not complete. The figure for NSFAS we had for 2 years ago, 40% of NSFAS students fail their first year. In other words, we count these billions of rands, but lots of them, they go through down the drain. 1/3 of NSFAS students finish on record time. Another third drops out completely. And another third would finish a 3-year degree in 6 or 7 years' time. That is why when some other countries, I'm not saying that's what we must do, but I know some other countries who offer some tuition-free higher education. They don't support anyone who got less than 70% in matric equivalent, because they want to guarantee that those that go to university will pass, are not going to fail, so that government gets a return. Of course, we're in a country like South Africa, we understand. That is why under that paragraph 8 also you will see that we talk about bullet point number 4, providing significant investment in foundation provision and a range of other initiatives, such as the teaching development grant at universities with the aim to improve the success rates of all students. One of the things...
To interrupt you on that, we even on that point had to ask the basic education to come in and talk to us about the readiness of our matriculants, you know, into a system where an investment of this nature is made. What would be your comment on that?
Of course, sorry. Of course, Commissioner Kumaro, you're raising an important point, because much as we have 2 departments of education, but we have 1 education system. We don't have 2. That is why one of the things, for instance, the Department of Basic Education is doing now, engaging with us, is to look at streaming the basic education system, because it's still primarily having an academic orientation. That is why now what basic education is looking into, engaging with us, is to have 2 more streams, what they call occupational stream in the schooling system and vocational stream. So that also, and also, by the way, to improve career guidance, which is another big issue that we are attending to, because we have been given that responsibility as higher education and training, but we can't do it successfully without cooperating with basic education. So it is an issue such so that we are able also to produce graduates, or well, high school students who are able to do better at university. But there is another problem here that maybe, because we've asked this question, that briefly I might just raise. We're possibly the only country in the world, possibly. I'm not 100% sure. If we are not, we are amongst very few countries in the world that have got a 12-year schooling system and 3-year degree at university, largely. Many countries require, for instance, a 13th year if you are to go to university. In the UK and Zimbabwe is referred to as the A-levels. And then you have a 3-year degree. Usually the countries that have got a 12-year schooling system have got a 4-year basic degree across the board. Now, there is a recommendation that has been made to us that why don't we increase our degrees by 1 year? We're very reluctant to go that route, unless we guarantee that that will make a difference, because there's an extra billions of rands in the system, and only to find maybe that it only makes a marginal improvement to the performance at university. But that's those are some of the issues we must look into, which I'm glad that the esteemed members of the Commission are asking about it, because for me it's very important that much as we are looking at money, but this problem will not be resolved by money alone. We have to look into other factors.
Minister, I see our time is flying, and we come back to universities in the context of addressing other topics, for example, government's response to the demand for free higher education and training. I think just before we break for lunch, maybe you would want to deal with the community education and training sector, and then we can break for lunch and come back to universities.
Okay. Let me just again summarize this, Judge, with your permission, because I'm sure you might also have been given more detail. What we are trying to respond to here through we call them in short community colleges in our lingo in the department. We would like that also maybe hopefully to be a community lingo. We are trying to respond to this challenge of adult education. We have got too many South Africans, we still have got too many South Africans who have left school before completing grade 12. There are those also who have completed grade 12, but they've not passed grade 12. We estimated in terms of our research that there are about 18 million South Africans who have left school who require some form of adult education of one type or the other. 18 million. Now, if you look at our post-school system, its numbers, it's 1.1 million at universities. It's just under 8, let's say 800,000 at our TVET colleges, which is 1.9. And then we have got 350,000, is it? In our adult basic education and training centers. So it's what, 2.2 million, around there, 2.3, out of a demand which we say seems to be around 18 million. Now, one of the problems with our adult basic education and training institutions, the ABET institutions, as we call them, sometimes they are known now as community learning centers, is that they cater for only one type of education. They cater for those adults who want to improve their formal education. I left school in standard 7, so I go to an ABET center to do standard 8 or standard 9 so that I can write matric. And then the world opens up. What our department in particular has taught us is that the needs of adult South Africans are much more varied than that. You may find a lady who left school in standard 5 has no interest actually in doing standard 6 or working towards writing matric, but wants to learn a skill, whether it's baking or fencing, in order to make a living, has identified an opportunity. Where do you go to find that? Nowhere. So in other words, to use a word that doesn't exist possibly in English, is that we also want to vocationalize our adult basic education and training center to be able to provide some short-skilled programs. Hopefully that will have a relationship with TVET colleges such that it's possible you can get someone from a community college to acquire certain qualifications, and if that person gets motivated can go to a TVET college or even a university for that matter. Also, they are poorly supported, these ABET centers. There are all sorts of things. Some have got some infrastructure, others they have no infrastructure. They are using a school or a university somewhere to be able to produce this. We want to attend to that. We also want to attend to educators in the sector to make sure that they have also got skills. It's a very ambitious charge. It's a very ambitious project, but we need it as a country. If we don't cater for this section of the South African population that didn't finish school, we will then be perhaps, as Advocate Pillay was arguing earlier, in contempt of 29(1)(b) of the Constitution, because we also do need to address that. Now, by grouping these then into community colleges, because what used to happen is that in each province, let's say we have got 800 of these centers dispersed all over. It's very poor, it's very difficult to support them. So now we are saying we're going to group them by province initially. And now we have 9 community colleges that are looking after these centers with a principal and a council, so that then hopefully they can begin to be able to support them better. That is what is the essence of. But going forward, maybe in 10 years' time, you might start breaking down these colleges, such that in one province you start saying, well, maybe let's have 4 community colleges, so that we move even closer in terms of supporting these institutions. Now, this is in our white paper, this is in our plan. We don't have money. Now, I know, Judge, that maybe I should even try and preempt you. I'm not sitting in your mind. You will say, why do you do this if there is no money? Why do you do it? No, I'm saying, Judge, I don't want to jump the gun. Possibly you would ask me that question at some stage to say, why do these community colleges if there is no money? You see, that is then the crux that we are faced with as a country, because we're sitting with a huge demand. You can't just sit down and not do anything about it. You try to use what you have to start building something. Otherwise, if you don't do anything, you are faced with the kinds of problems that we are facing with the university system now. Not that we haven't done anything. So that is what is at the heart of our community colleges. We hope that government will have to reprioritize so that we are able also to get money to do this. Some of the creative means now we are beginning to do is to say to some of the sitters, are there community college type programs that you could begin to support? For example, early childhood development initiatives. Where should those be offered? TVET colleges, or some of them may be offered in community colleges as programs that are actually, and other kinds of community skills that are needed by communities that can be offered by these institutions, so that we are able to really realize the objectives of Section 29(1)(b) of the Constitution.
Minister.
Oh, no, Minister, I wanted to check in terms of priorities, what would be higher education or these colleges? What is your sense in that, being in the department where both priorities are coming up as constitutional rights?
Judge, I must be careful how I answer this question. Because I don't want to be seen to be saying university education is not important. Perhaps let me start there before I answer your question directly. Participation rates in higher education or in university education in South Africa are still highly racialized, for instance. I don't have the figures in my head, but participation rates are highest amongst white South Africans today as we speak, and are lowest. It's very interesting figures, because also participation rates in the Indian community is very high at university at this point in time. And then the lowest, almost the same, is African and colored, if I use those categories. So we still need to increase participation rates for black South Africans in a big way in university education. However, having said that, the sector that needs to grow fastest is the college sector in this country. Because much as we should look at participation rates, but we should also be looking at the needs, those who are not anywhere, who needs to be absorbed by the college sector. That is why our white paper says, and NDP, 1.6 million university students by 2030, but 2.5 in TVET colleges and 1 million in community colleges. Those are the sectors that needs to grow faster, both in absolute terms and proportionately, than the university system. Even a question does need to be asked. How do you reach 1.6 million university students by 2030? Sometimes when we talk 2030, it's like it's far. It's 14 years away from now. if not 13 actually, as we are finishing 2016. Do we not need, which is what our plan also is, a question that it has posed, and it intends to address, increasing distance provision as one way of expanding. Although at the moment the failure rates are too high in distance because of lack of support. But the long and short of my answer is that we need to expand the college sector faster, much faster than the university sector. I think we've done relatively well as a department, despite the challenges that we have, because when we started in 2009, it was like 3 university students to 1 college student, to 4 actually, when we started in 2009. Now we are almost at 1:1. Even with NSFAS, when you notice, this year it's 205,000 university students who are on NSFAS and 200,000 who are on NSFAS in TVET colleges, 205 in universities, to actually try and do that. That is the reality. If we are to address, Judge, this anomaly that we've got such high youth unemployment, sitting side by side with high levels of skills shortages, it really is a huge anomaly. The only way then to actually address that is to open up the college sector. Let me end by saying, college sector is not only TVET. It's nursing colleges, it's agricultural colleges, and a whole range of other specialist colleges that we need as a country in order to be able to address our skills needs, whilst at the same time absorbing young people, giving them hope. Hence the importance of the idea of post-school education and training rather than just university education.
Ms. Pillay, lunchtime?
Just one final question on this topic, Chair, and then, Minister, just very briefly, we spent time earlier this morning analyzing the constitutional right.
The
And
constitutional?
We know the constitutional right.
Oh, okay.
And we know that the right to basic education is separate from the right to further education, and that the right to basic education includes adult basic education. Now, with that paradigm in mind, why is it that adult basic education was shifted from basic education to higher education, the Department of Higher Education?
The thinking there is that if Judge, you accept the distinction between school and post-school, is that adult education really belongs to post-school. It doesn't belong to basic education, and it's different in character. And it's also got its own unique challenges in terms of how it needs to be provided. Well, I suppose there is no ideal solution in other countries as part of basic. Here it has been part of basic, but government decided that, no, look, in order to give it an injection, also part of the thinking of government was that just allow focus on our schooling system. We've got enough challenges. It's huge. It's 12 million learners. Let's just focus on it. It's got many, many challenges. And not then have university or the post-school dimensions of it. Let another department actually focus on that. But of course, the two departments, as I have said, they need to be relating each other if we are to maximize even the possible gains out of creating two departments. So my answer would be that it is post-school. It's not a school, much as some of the people at school. Also, I must say this, Judge, that it underlines what I was saying also earlier, that part of the problem of making adult basic education part of schooling is that it becomes an academic program only. It is unable to actually offer vocational type programs. So if you are locating vocational type programs as part of post-school, locate it there so that we are able, to use another word, to diversify the offerings in the adult basic education stream.
Just a last follow-up, Minister, and then I promise it's lunchtime. Does the decision to migrate adult basic education to the Department of Higher Education and Training, does that have funding implications? Does it mean more competition for the purse of the Department of Higher Education and Training?
Yes, Judge, it does put pressure on our budget in a big way. But it's a government responsibility. Because if there is one area that we really almost totally neglected in South Africa historically, is adult education. I'm more than happy to actually admit that. And it was not provided with adequate budget, even when it was still under one department or part of schooling in the provinces. It was like an abandoned little cousin in the system that we really didn't pay particular attention to. Part of doing this is to say this now requires very serious attention. But of course, you can't give it the kind of attention it requires unless also resources flow into that.
Thank you, Chairperson. If I may propose that we take the lunch adjournment now.
Half an hour?
And if I may propose, yes, a half an hour lunch adjournment. Thank
We'll
you.
adjourn for lunch for half an hour.
Now, we also this year subsidize the 2.3 billion rand shortfall as a result of no fee increase. Government paid 1.9 billion. Current work, as I have said, focusing on the missing middle. By the way, I need to correct this because the focus on the missing middle is not something that arises out of the Fees Must Fall campaign. Government, we had already identified this a few years back and actually started doing some work because we're seeing this as a problem as a result partly also of a NSFAS cap that has not been changing or that has not changed for a very long time. So the fact that we have grown NSFAS like this, it shows government's commitment to this. Similarly in TVET colleges as well. Maybe I can pause there, Judge, in terms of our response. But maybe before I pause, sorry, let me just say this, just to underline the point that I've made. It is not money alone that will be the solution to these problems that we are facing, but it's also to create conditions for this money to make maximum impact, to focus on improving the pass rates and the throughput rates, as well as ensuring that these monies are also handled properly without any form of corruption, which is a challenge in the system. Let me pause there, Judge.
Minister, may I ask, before we go on to the measures introduced by government in response to the demand, a central premise of the students' demand, as we've heard through presentations made before us, is for what is termed decommodification of education. Now, has government come to terms with what is meant by decommodification, and what's your response to the demand that higher education should be decommodified?
Government agrees with the idea that education should be decommodified. The issue is, what is the content, the meaning of that decommodification? And what does it translate into? Decommodification simply means education must not be sold and bought like a jersey, so that only those who can afford money for the jersey will be able to get the jersey. It should be accessible to all those who require it. In our instance, we have defined that as the poor in the first instance, as well as those categories who may not be falling within the poor, but who cannot be able to afford. That's why we have these policies, precisely because we want access to education not to be based on who has money or who doesn't have money. But that some take this too far to say education must therefore be free for everyone. That's not government policy. And I think that it's not going to be government policy for a long time to come. We have a highly unequal society. Those who can afford to pay must pay, and those who are rich and wealthy must also pay. It's inappropriate for a society like ours to define decommodification in that manner. It must be the poor and those who cannot afford who must actually be assisted.
Do you understand the students' demands as being demands that there should be free education for everybody?
Some of them, not all of them, Judge. Some of them actually are putting this slogan, and some academics saying that it must be free for everyone. They want free quality higher education now.
So the demand for decommodification, Minister, has thus far been made by a number of student formations before us. It's been made by SAUS, by BLF, by SASCO, by YCL. And the basis for the demand for decommodification of higher education is the public good that's derived from higher education. And in their view, that the public good is so overwhelming that your university should be free for all, and that there shouldn't be any price tag attached to higher education. And so, in other words, no tuition fees at all, and that government must just pay for all of your university education. And what's your response to that?
Judge, from my engagement with the students, not all are calling for that. There are others who understand that it's not for all. It's not free higher education for all. As I've said, some are demanding that, but not all of them. Some of the students grouping understand it. As I say, we have no problem with decommodification. In fact, in our instance, in our case, let me put it that way, as South Africa now, what we are doing is part of decommodification of education. By saying to those who cannot pay, it must not be like a commodity they can't afford. But to pay for the rich would not be decommodification, actually. You will be asking the poor to subsidize the rich. If you ask everybody, including the rich, to be paid for by government, you would actually be commodifying education because the poor will subsidize the rich.
Minister, it does seem that what you mean by decommodification depends somewhat on your political philosophy, because certain of the students suggested that private education, private higher institutions were ipso facto commodification of education, and that the providers of private education should be thrown in jail.
In my young days, I used to say so too, Judge. Not that my ideological orientation has changed, but we should take into account context. Let me put it like this. Some have been saying and arguing, Cuba, higher education is free for everyone. Of course it should be, because there is no wealthy class in Cuba. So that's a different situation altogether. You can't, in highly unequal capitalist societies, have free higher education for all. Even where you have had that in some few countries, the situation has been very different. For instance, if you take some of the Scandinavian countries, the taxes are high. You have got almost near full employment of society with very high taxes. And also the standards are high. You can't get to university unless you have got 70, 75%, and they are actually sure that you are going to pass. But even in some countries, it's not free in the sense that Germany, for instance, they've done away with tuition fees, but it's only a tuition-free system. Food, accommodation, transport, you pay for yourself. You know, Judge, maybe just to illustrate what I'm saying, our Consul General in Munich, when I heard that higher education is now free in Germany, not only for Germans, for every student, even from outside Germany, I said, this is my opportunity I've been looking for, because I want spaces for masters and PhDs as part of our training of new academics. Well, she just became cold, you know. Said, well, I'm not so sure whether we'll benefit out of this because it's only tuition. And possibly the place to stay will cost 3 times more. And the food and the transport, even if it's public transport. So it may not be cheap after all for South Africans to go to Germany, even if they can benefit from tuition fee. So that would be our argument and government's position as to decommodification in our context. What does it mean?
Minister, you're correct that certain students, while they do make out a case for decommodification, have tempered the demand so that at the moment they ask for, they ask for fee-free higher education and training for the poor and the missing middle. But they do definitely maintain that at some point we should realize fee-free higher education and training for all. So in other words, they accept that at the moment it might not be appropriate because of our economic circumstances, but government has to work towards realizing fee-free higher education and training for all at some point. What's your response to that?
Yeah. No, Judge, it depends on what we are talking about. Maybe at some point, yes.
As the percentage of poor becomes very small in the whole population.
Possibly, or if you have a socialist South Africa, Judge.
Yeah.
That would add what also would necessitate and also under what conditions, you know, I'm just saying. But on this trajectory we are on as a country, it's difficult to see that in the immediate future. Maybe in future, yes, we will reach that. That's fine. Yeah.
But Minister, your point remains. It's not government policy now,
Yes.
and it won't be government policy for a long time. Well, perhaps in our foreseeable future.
If South Africa remains the kind of society with this economic system that it has, you know, I don't see that happening under that context.
Minister, we've looked quite closely at the chapter on education in the NDP, Chapter 9. And it's very clear that littered throughout the entire chapter is emphasis on the public good to be derived from higher education. And in fact, we had before us, testifying before us, the Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission, Professor Makgoba. And his testimony was that the NDP does approach the question of higher education as a public good. Do you agree with that interpretation?
I entirely agree, Judge, that education should be seen as a common public good, which is why the poor must be assisted to access it, because it's a public good. But also we must create institutions that are available to all, like we are doing now. We are subsidizing the university system, we are subsidizing the college system for everybody. They benefit from that subsidy in terms of, as Advocate Pillay was saying, you know, the block grants and to a large extent the EMA grant that we actually do. In our context, to make education a common public good, we must invest in it, build a good quality system. Like our system is very reputable, not only in the African continent, the university system, but globally. That is why government is investing, because it is a common public good.
Now, Professor Makgoba's view, Minister, was that, in fact, the NDP envisages free higher education and training for all. And he states that government can afford free higher education and training for all, and it's just a question of prioritization that's preventing the rolling out of free higher education and training for all. So in other words, his testimony was that there's a misalignment between what the NDP requires and what the budget ultimately provides.
Maybe I'm in a little bit of a disadvantage because I have not seen the actual formulation by Professor Makgoba. But that is not how I understand the NDP to be saying that. It says it's free higher education for all. By the way, even now, this free higher education for the poor is up until the attainment of an undergraduate qualification. It's not for the rest of your honors, your masters, your PhDs, you know. Those get funded through scholarships based almost exclusively on merit, you know, that you're doing well, you can be able to access. Is at least until you acquire, not until, free higher education for the poor until undergraduate qualification.
Yeah, just on that, Minister, Dr. Parker, we engaged her on that similar thing, that what if a formative maybe qualification does not allow you to enter the workplace immediately. We made an example maybe of a BA law, and then you still need an LLB so that you can do articles, so that you are employable. So, and we were saying, how does fee-free help then? Because we've got a graduate with a degree that is not vocational in nature, on its own. And then she said, on those circumstances, the TEFSA caps, in that it funds the senior degree. I'm not sure if there is how it was kept.
Just to clarify, for instance, you have your BCom, and if you want to be a chartered accountant, you must do that honors. So she was explaining to us in those circumstances that there would be funding available for that, and for an engineering, if you needed the extra diploma or certificate, that would be funded too.
Yes, she was correct. I was just articulating the principle that it's free till undergraduate qualification. Then what kicks in there is the scarce skills intervention, the fund of scarce skills that goes to NSFAS, which then says we will support in instances where it requires. For instance, let me make another example, Judge, which is a problem area that we have at the moment, is that in universities of technology, the basic qualification is a diploma, which often is a 3-year diploma, say a 3-year diploma in civil engineering. You graduate. Strictly speaking, NSFAS doesn't then fund your BTech, which is your next 1-year program, because then we will be going outside the bounds of the policy. But if it's in scarce skills area, and that BTech is going to enable you to then be able to go into the field so that you can register as a professional engineer, then we provide assistance there. I suppose that's the issue of priorities again, that we say in this instance, because these are the skills we need, we will actually do extra support in order to be able to produce the kinds of skills that we need.
Sorry, does the Act in its current format articulate that, or it's an alignment that needs to be made?
What, the NSFAS Act? I'm not so sure. We will need to check that, what it says. But we regard this as a policy intervention guided by a whole range of government policies in terms of what our priorities are. It may not be in the Act like that, but it's our policy interventions which we think are necessary in order to address skills shortages.
Minister, if I may ask you to have a look at Annexure A to this letter.
Ms. Pillay, can you just help us? In our pack, we don't have an annexure
in the
A.
pack that we submitted to you, Judge, is that right, Advocate?
It's not marked. If Ms. Pillay can just help us.
It appears in a block, so it looks like a table in the table format.
Is that the one
I think
which has
it's
got
written
report, recommendation?
recommendations. That's correct.
I've got it.
Now, you said what is set out in this table, Minister, is the recommendations made in the report of the Ministerial Committee on the review of NSFAS scheme, and the recommendations made and the status of implementation of the recommendations. The one I just wanted to ask certain questions around is B in the first block. We know that one of the recommendations of this ministerial committee was that a higher education student financial aid model that progressively provides free higher education to undergrad level for students from the poor and working class communities. And one of the steps taken to implement that was, as set out in B, a ministerial task team chaired by Mr. Sizwe Nkosana has been established in April 2016 to develop a comprehensive funding and student support model for poor and missing middle students. Do you see that, Minister?
Yes, I can see that.
Now, what's clear from what's reflected here is that the task team that's been established under the chairpersonship of Mr. Ngwasana is meant to look at a model, or is meant to come up with a student support model for the poor and missing middle students. Now, what I wanted to ascertain, does this mean that a policy decision has been made within the department and within government that students from the missing middle will from now on be funded? And what's left to determine at this stage is just a question of modality.
We have, as government, identified, Judge, that the issue of the missing middle, which, by the way, we started a while back, that is why I also need to say that there will have to be, a way of, separate these things, but
We agree, Minister, and we will be looking very closely at the report once we receive it.
That's
We've been
right.
trying very hard to get it, but because it was due to be placed before you, I think people were reluctant to give it to us first.
yes.
I'm just trying to ascertain, Minister, whether there has been a policy decision that students from the missing middle will be funded through NSFAS going forward.
We have identified that as a gap, and there is an in-principle commitment that we need to find a way of assisting missing middle students. As to what form that will take, we're not yet there. Although a lot of work has been done by the ministerial task team, and maybe also, of course, as the Commission, we've got the power to subpoena, but we were of the view that because of the political sensitivities, maybe when that report comes, we need to first processes, which doesn't prevent the Commission from making its comments or any type of comment on it, so that we are able to manage that at least, because also from a political point of view, it's got monetary implications. So in terms of our own procedures, for instance, you'll have to have it via cabinet, even if cabinet doesn't take a decision, but just to be aware of what that means. So as to where that money comes from to help the missing middle is something that also has yet to be established. But certainly, yes, we think that as government, we need to find ways and means of supporting the missing middle.
So this policy decision that's been made, Minister, that we will now come to the assistance of the missing middle and the money will follow. So money will be found to implement at least the pilot in 2017.
Maybe let me put it this way, that the two things have to come together, because we have identified that the missing middle requires support. But you may find that because of the complexity, I'm making an example, of supporting the missing middle, therefore it doesn't become possible, then we will have to relook into that. But we have identified and have said we appreciate that there is a real need there.
Now, we know that the model will be piloted in 2017. We've had evidence before this commission that the pilot will be implemented in 2017. I just want to understand, Minister, what factors will be considered as to whether or not to extend the pilot beyond 2017?
Well, firstly, I need to make this clear that we have not as yet, the highest authority, which is Cabinet, has not yet given the green light. It's a suggestion that a pilot needs to be undertaken for 2017. But even if the go-ahead gets given, it does not therefore mean that after the pilot, it certainly means it will be implemented. That's why it's called a pilot. Because after that pilot, you might actually say, no, this thing is actually not working, you know. Either we throw it out or we find completely different ways of dealing with it. And in dealing with that, as I say, we said, let's not stop this groundwork. But that thing will also not be actually finally be concluded outside of the Commission's work, Judge.
And just in terms of the pilot, I'm just trying to get a sense of how it will work, Minister. If you have a student who is from the missing middle and who enters the system in 2017 on the strength that she will qualify for NSFAS funding on the basis of the implementation of the pilot, what happens to that student in 2017 if the decision is not to continue with the model beyond 2017?
I get your point. The proposal, which, as I say, have also not been officially accepted, is that if a pilot were to be done, it would only be done in 7 institutions, if I'm not mistaken. That is the proposal. But you are right. Maybe it's something that we hadn't thought about, which you are raising as to, if we pilot, you are in a way creating an expectation already. So then that will have to be taken into account as to, in looking at the report, it certainly is something that will have to be looked into.
And just the final point on the pilot, Minister, is that you know that in terms of 29(1)B, you have to put in place measures to progressively realize the right. So once you pilot the model for 2017, if you remove the model after that, isn't that a retrogressive measure?
If you remove support, not necessarily the model,
Well,
because you may pilot
the support
and
by
then,
virtue of the model, yes, the support to missing middle.
we will have to look into that. Because, as I say, it's a legitimate point that we are actually raising. As part of responding to or as part of engaging with the proposal as a whole. That is why, therefore, it's very important that sooner rather than later, that model will have to come here, because the Commission will have to reflect on that. Otherwise, we run the risk of indirectly taking away the role, some of the powers of the role of the Commission, or we run parallel processes that would not actually be ideal. But as I said, insofar as doing the investigation, we said we mustn't stop it just because there is a commission, because that work, if then it's going to come in here, at least there's some groundwork that has been done.
We appreciate that, Minister, and we have certainly been looking forward to seeing the report. We've been told that the buck stops with you, Minister, so maybe you can tell us when we can expect the report.
Maybe if, through you, Judge, I can request perhaps that our counsel here could maybe engage with yourself as evidence leader at some stage to actually discuss this matter, because it's not that the buck stops with me in not wanting the report to come here. It's the period we are in, and that if such a thing, because once it comes here, it's public. When we haven't looked at it, the political structures, we are not saying that the Commission is subject to those political structures. I don't want to be misunderstood. Judicial Commission has got powers over everybody. But also it's important that, so that even when you call us afterwards and say, what are you saying about this report, we would have had a chance to at least look at it through the necessary political structures. I don't know, Judge, maybe with your permission, because we did discuss this matter with the...
If I might just come on record very briefly, Judge.
Yes, I don't know whether there's any point in swearing you in, since you're simply going to add a helpful comment.
Yes, I don't propose to give any evidence. Just that there is a clear legal as well as political sensitivity about furnishing a document which is drafted for submission to Cabinet, which Cabinet hasn't yet had an opportunity to see or to take a view on. And therefore we would hope that without getting into legalities, we can find some modality that would be acceptable to all interested parties. If not, we'll have to face that problem if we get there, but we don't anticipate we should be in that situation.
Well, you can't give us any time frame.
I personally can't. I don't know whether the Minister can.
When would you hope that it would be placed before the Cabinet, Minister?
Judge, the report now is supposed to be with my office, with the department. That's what we had agreed. DG, he's still finalizing it. Now, what time is it now? What day is it?
We're looking in the context of the Commission's, as you know, timetable.
Yeah. Okay. I think, can we come back to you, Judge, on that?
Yes, I can't see that we can bind you to anything here.
Yes.
And I don't think it would be right to do so anyway.
Yes.
Except
We'll
that
come
I
back
would
to you
ask
as soon as possible.
I would ask you to bear in mind that it is important in the work that we're doing.
Yes.
And we wouldn't like to find that the government is running in one direction and we in the other, with little possibility of our meeting.
Judge, I agree entirely with you. That's what I've been emphasizing, that this commission will have to have sight and be briefed and be able also to ask questions about that, because it would be a proposal. Yes. It's just that our concern is that it should just take certain stages. And also we want to bear in mind that we don't want to delay the work of the commission.
I fully understand that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. If we can move briefly to the question of prioritization, Minister. Now, we know that in the past year or two, since the Fees Must Fall movement began in 2015, there have been a number of significant decisions taken in response to the protest action. These include the 0% fee increment decision, the decision, what we call the Circular 6 decision around student debt, the wiping out of student debt for the past 3 years. And it includes the more recent decision that government will subsidize or will cover the fee increment in relation to poor and missing middle students for 2017. And of course, then also the pilot, which we've just been discussing now for 2017. All of these appear to be concrete measures introduced by government in response, in direct response to the protest action. The question, however, Minister, is why these measures were not introduced before the protest action commenced. In other words, was it a question of lack of political will, or what was the reason that these interventions only became apparent once the protest action had taken center stage?
Judge, I assume that Advocate Pillay now is covering issues that are just about in the rest of the document. Am I right?
I'm sorry, I may have jumped. It's under the rubric of response. No, I'm happy, Minister, if you want to first deal with the narrative and then we can go on to the questions.
No, I don't have a problem actually, because it may be a better way in view of time that, maybe we just begin to go into those issues. And where I feel maybe that I just need to say something a little bit more that is here, I will say it in the context of my answers. I would like to say, Judge, that at no stage did we stop the process of progressive introduction of free higher education for the poor as government. What the students they were complaining about perhaps is something that we can relate to the pace at which things were happening in government, but we never stopped. For example, if you look at NSFAS, the increases in NSFAS and other interventions that were made were actually informed by the necessity to continue to progressively introduce free higher education for the poor. And then, of course, of late also talking about the issue of the missing middle. Let me give concrete examples of that. The first one is the fact that NSFAS more than tripled between 2010 and 2015. That was the fastest growing item on the entire budget of government, which then shows the extent to which we were doing this. Secondly, we also made, it's in one of the documents here now, you see, I'm not as elegant as lawyers. Lawyers, they always impress me, Judge, in court, you know. If you go to document so and so, it's all nicely numbered and so on. I'm not yet, but there is a document here which talks about interventions that we made to NSFAS, which points to, amongst other things, interventions we made to improve and to make it easier for students to access the poor students. For example, when our department was established in 2009, students were charged interest on NSFAS the first day they get the loan. In other words, here is Blade Nzimande coming to do LLB first year. So I get given a NSFAS loan. I start on the 23rd of February at university. Interest starts accumulating then. I get for the second year LLB2 more and more interest, you know. By the time you leave, you finish your degree, you not only owe the original capital, but it's also huge interest. So what we did, we said, no, this is very unfair. It makes life very difficult. So we are not going to charge interest until a year after graduation, which were some of the measures that we were actually taking to introduce. I've already spoken about the final year, that if you finish all your courses for final year, that gets converted into a bursary. We then also the National Skills Fund, which this year has released 1.3 billion for scarce skills. By the way, those scarce skills bursaries are full grants. They are not to be paid back. So all these were measures that we were implementing, including, of course, expansion into TVET colleges. I would like to say, Judge, without fear of contradiction, there is free higher education in South Africa. The problem is that it has not reached everybody who is supposed to be benefiting from it.
Well, there's also a contradiction in this, because the more you convert NSFAS loans into bursaries, the less self-sustaining you make the project. And one of the basic foundations of the NSFAS scheme was the intention that it should strive towards self-sustainability.
Yes and no, Judge. Because right from the word go, the model of NSFAS was that it will be a mix. It will have a loan component, possibly larger, but it will also have a bursary or grant component.
Yes, but in 2014, the recovery rate of NSFAS loans was 4%.
Yes, Judge, but
which suggests that self-sustainability has been thrown out of the window.
That's a slightly different problem.
Well, it's a combined problem, I would have thought.
Yes.
Anyway.
It's a slightly different problem because that one relates to capacity rather than abandoning recovery. that NSFAS has really been battling with capacity to recover, which now we are significantly improving through working in the main with the South African Revenue Service. And through other methods, we've actually identified now many people who are not paying back, who actually must be paying. We're identifying them now that they should actually pay. We always knew, Judge, we always knew that we will not, there will be money into NSFAS that will not come back because it will be translated into a grant, which means that the fiscus will always have will be paid back. Examining it quite critically, you know, and what needs to be done.
Minister, just to return, I believe the document you're trying to refer to, on the top says old NSFAS and improved NSFAS.
Yes.
In an answer to Ms. Pillay with regards to that it wasn't only now in response to the students, you were wanted to refer to that document. Is that correct?
Say that again, Advocate.
In response to Ms. Pillay's question to you about government only now increasing or government only now announcing these decisions in response to the fees must fall, the start of your argument was it's not only now.
Yes.
And then you said there's a document. Is that the document you wanted to refer to?
Yes. But it doesn't constitute the totality of my answer. Because I was raising for now, referring to this document, just to illustrate the point that we have been doing certain things to improve NSFAS as part of implementing fee-free higher education for the poor. Then the point then I was going to be making is that what the student protests in essence are saying is that your pace is not enough. You need to move faster. Which is why then in moving faster, well, that response was really to deal with an immediate situation to say there shall be no fee increase. It was an interim thing. That is why it was accompanied at the same time by the announcement of the establishment of this commission. Because that is this commission that must now help us to move faster, but also come up with a plan of how is this going to be done. 2017 also is a stopgap measure. It's an interim measure to say whilst we are tying up, the commission is doing its work, let's find some measures of relief, given now what the students are saying. It is true, we must admit, we were implementing it, but the students are saying not fast enough.
Minister, you testified that education has been, for a number of years now, has been an apex priority for government. That's correct? And do we assume from that that higher education and training is also an apex, has always been an apex priority, government's apex priority?
From 2009, in terms of government's medium-term strategic framework, it said there are 5 priorities, and then the apex priority being education, including higher education, but within the context of the Constitution, not in the same way, for instance, between basic and higher education. or further education as it is captured in the Constitution.
Can I just understand what that means, Minister? Does that mean that how you've articulated the constraints on the rights in the Constitution, that's transferred into how government approaches education as an apex priority?
Say that again, sorry.
You mentioned that it's an apex priority, that education is an apex priority through the Constitution. I'm just trying to understand what that means.
No, not through the Constitution. Government's policy as captured in the medium-term strategic framework from 2009 identified education as an apex priority. 5 priorities in the main, which translates into particular outcomes. No, but you were asking me if then I'm talking about education as an apex priority, do I mean both basic and higher? That is why I said yes, but within the context of the Constitution, that the two things are not exactly the same, much as they are an apex priority.
But can I just ask you to explain what that means in real terms, in practical terms?
What it means when I say within the Constitution, it's exactly it's the difference between 29(1)A and 29(1)B. That 29(1)A talks about basic education as a fundamental right, but it does 29(1)B doesn't say so in relation to further education.
Does this mean that while both basic education and further education and higher education are both apex priorities, that basic education is of a higher priority than a higher education?
The way it is defined in the Constitution, as you said earlier, when you were talking about basic and adult education, that it's a must, that they must be given money. Unlike 29(1)B. The fact that we're talking about both, it meant also in relation to 29(1)B, we actually intended to accelerate the realization of 29(1)B, which amongst other things is illustrated by the increase in NSFAS and the expansion of NSFAS into TVET colleges.
We had before us, Minister, Mr. Michael Sachs, who is a DDG in National Treasury, and he testified before us that at the Cabinet Lekgotla in July of this year, a decision was taken that higher education is an apex priority. And within that context, that it might indicate that higher education is treated differently in the budgeting from now onwards.
Judge, I'm glad if Treasury came here to say that, because they are precisely the ones who must then give content to that. If he said that, yes, of course, we hope that the medium-term budget policy statement to be announced by the Minister of Finance is possibly going to signal that. Hopefully. Of course, I can't say that. I'm not the Minister of Finance, but I'm happy if Treasury came to say that, because, of course, they are the ones authorized to actually come out and say, okay, it is an apex priority and it's going to be showing in the budget that now more resources are going to be going into post-school, hopefully.
In fairness to Mr. Sachs, I should indicate he didn't say it will be reflected in the budget. He said it may be reflected in the budget.
That's better, Judge. It's better than nothing.
Minister, well, perhaps let's get the facts right first.
Yeah.
If it was said in the Cabinet Lekgotla, number one, you would have been present.
Yes.
Your recall of the Lekgotla, was it understood in that manner as articulated by Ms. Pillay?
Judge, I have a bit of a difficulty now with this question. The reason being that, not that I don't want to answer, but cabinet discussions are secret, and also cabinet decisions are announced through particular authorized channels. That is why I'm saying that if he said that, coming from Treasury, having the authority to talk about translation of priorities into rands and cents, hopefully, I would rather leave it at that to Treasury to be able to do that. And I'm saying, I'm hoping that something will come out clearly out of the medium-term budget statement. Because even if I was present, make that mistake of speaking when cabinet, unless, of course, you know, the laws then of the country or other processes trump that. I'm in a bit of a difficulty there.
Well,
Judge.
we're not going to get into this, that sort of debate now.
Okay.
You may assume that for the moment what is said in Cabinet is confidential.
Yeah.
May I just ask you, Minister, you testified that the department has made numerous bids to National Treasury for further funding, for additional funding, and that not many of these are successful. Perhaps you can enlighten us as to where it is that the problems are being encountered, at what level, just so that we could understand where to conduct our inquiries.
Firstly, a bigger question that perhaps faces not just government, although immediately it's a government issue. Is government budget reflective of our priorities in the manner that it should be? Frankly, I think that would be an issue that I would even like the Commission with appropriate people to interrogate that.
We are in the process of interrogating that issue, Minister.
Yes, I would be very pleased. Because often the problem arises from there, one source of the problem. But it's not a malicious thing if a budget doesn't, to the detail, reflect the priorities of government as they are, because of the many balancing acts that has got to be done and the many priorities that are there. That's the first issue. The second issue, though, is the state of the economy and the revenue, therefore, that government is able to get as a result of the poor state of the economy. As a matter of fact, one of the difficulties, if you ask me, as a minister in cabinet, first appointed in 2009 and again in 2014, is that I've been a government minister responsible for a department that requires huge sums of money at a time, right at the time in 2008, there was a global economic meltdown. That has been my frustration, Judge. Because had we maybe in another situation, maybe we would actually be talking differently. As I say, I'm not the Minister of Finance. I'm just telling you that this government has been in the shadow of the fact that we've been in a global economic crisis that we are not out of at the moment. We were partly cushioned by selling our minerals to China, which was gobbling iron ore and everything. China has stopped now. We're also cushioned by infrastructure, investment into infrastructure. The administration between 2009 to 2014 investing a record trillion rands, which also cushioned us. Otherwise, it's been very difficult economically being in these two administrations, the past one as well as this one, which also is another source.
Now, why this question of prioritization becomes so crucial, Minister, is that we see immediately after the protest action in 2015, and you'll see it reflected in this letter, which is the communique on the decisions reached in January. And you'll see the middle paragraph says, the President in his January 8th statement to the nation announced that government has listened to the concerns raised by the student and has made the following key decisions on the short-term funding challenges with the agreement of University South Africa. And then listed, you'll see a number of decisions relating to, for example, paying off historic student debt, etc. But what's clear from this excerpt, and this is really what we're driving at, Minister, is that a policy decision is made, and all of a sudden substantial amounts of money is released to follow that decision. Now, what we're trying to understand is how that happens. So in other words, are there pots of money floating around that can be accessed if and when the political decision is made?
Judge, there are no pots of money
Terry, disappointed.
that are lying out there to grab from. Because of the pressure, there was reprioritization. Let me tell you one prioritization that is very painful to me, Judge. Reprioritization. I had set aside R1 billion, my department, from the surpluses from the SETAs to send young black South Africans to many universities overseas because we don't have enough supervisory capacity for masters and PhDs, to be trained, educated, and to come back and be allocated to our universities for the period that we sent them overseas. That money is gone. It went to the no-fee increase. Now, the danger of that is that it then postpones, possibly by 3 years, our intervention to halt this process of the aging academics and unable to renew. Something that is important, that it's not just access, but it's also being able to have a quality university system. So always when this happens, unless you raise taxes, you will have to reprioritize from the existing budget. So it's a reprioritization. But what we must be clear about is that it's a reprioritization that makes good in one area but is costly for other areas. Let me also say something else, by the way, which I need to say. We had set aside, DG, through you, Judge, 2 billion rands over a 5-year period from this year, 2016 to 2020. 2 billion rands for 8 universities, which are former black universities here in South Africa. For them to be able to use that money to improve their programs and the quality of their offerings as they see fit. For example, University of Zululand was wanting to use that money to create conditions to be able to offer for the very first time in its history engineering programs at its Richards Bay campus. Engineering programs that we need desperately in the country. That money, large parts of it is gone, had to go to subsidize or to pay for a no-fee increase. That's why I think that we need to be absolutely clear that reprioritization means just that. And also, what unfortunately has happened, it has damaged programs that are necessary for the very same university system.
Minister, I want. It's been said that if maybe efficiencies can be improved in the system, in the South African system, we can limit maybe the wasteful expenditure, the corruption, and then we can maybe recover some funds from that. Is that not an option?
True, at one level, that if we fight corruption excuse me, and we are able to not have monies being lost by being stolen, we indeed are going to be able to do much more. But we need also to nuance that argument. You can't say 3 billion rands, for I'm making an example, lost in the health department is going to fund higher education. It will have to fund programs in the health section. So we also need to nuance it that way. Money lost.
If it's correctly allocated without the waste and the corruption, it would be on the common fiscus. Would it not be in the National Revenue Fund? It means it can be redistributed from there. You don't have even reached where it's not supposed to be.
Sure, I'm not disagreeing with that. All what I'm saying is perhaps putting differently the same point that I've made, that still it will have to take into account the many other pressing priorities of government, though it would improve the availability of money. That's what I'm saying. It wouldn't necessarily be automatic, but it would improve, but it will still have to be allocated in terms of the various needs of government. But there is no doubt that fighting corruption will really make a big difference if we are able not to lose the amounts of monies that are estimated that we are losing by treasury.
Minister, if I may briefly move on to PSET targets. And we know that the white paper sets out very aggressive targets for the expansion of the PSET system, and specifically enhanced enrollment targets. Now, you've already testified about the negative consequences of increased enrollments. And in the context of student funding, Minister, that means we know that increased enrollments mean, for example, that NSFAS allocations become inadequate, that universities are forced to top-slice. Certain universities, the ones who can't cross-subsidize, are forced to top-slice, etc., that you will inevitably then have high levels of student debt. We also know that increased enrollments have an impact on block grant funding, because it means less funding per capita student. Now, within that context, is it still government's policy that those enhanced targets should inform planning, or will the targets be revised in order to make them more realistic?
Well, Judge, I think it's a bit of a difficult question to answer, because it also involves projections of revenue. It also involves issues of capacity and all that. It's not impossible for government to revise targets, either downwards or upwards, depending on what the situation is. We hope not that they get revised downwards, because these targets set in the white paper and in the NDP have been very carefully worked out if we are to respond to the economic needs of our country, as well as also absorb our young people. Including, for instance, this target, which I'm sorry to be going back to it, it's because I'm very passionate about it, that we want to improve qualifications, academics qualifications in universities to 75% with PhDs by 2030. It's a very important target. At the moment, we're at what? 43? 43% PhDs. It's very low. In fact, the average looks a bit more respectable, Judge, if you go institution by institution. Some institutions, I've just learned recently of a lecturer who has been teaching for more than 10 years with an honors degree. Something that has got very negative effects on what we are trying to do. So if I understood your question correctly, Dr. Pillay, I hope that we do not revise these targets downwards.
I think you've just promoted me.
Oh, what
It's
did I
just-
say, doctor?
Yes, it's just mispronounced.
Yes, you should do a PhD also, Judge. Maybe that should be one of the decisions of this commission. And we will fund it, yes.
Minister, Minister, the consequence of your answer would probably be that if you look at the NDP and the white paper and their targets, is it that they were made at a time when certain projections were made, optimistic projections were made, and at a time when economically we were moving at a pace that was good enough to fund various projects? And therefore, it is important, and therefore, when you look at it now, you cannot take the same targets and say, well, Nomaganjan, we will implement it, because we don't have the resources. But is it not for government to educate everybody that the NDP is not necessarily cast in stone? They are there to guide us, and we must, how could we put it? We must endeavor to reach those particular targets.
Yeah. Maybe let me just share with the commission something. I don't know whether it's somewhere in our documentation that has been submitted before. There are 3 crucial processes that government is engaged in at the moment. The first one, in fact the first 2, are done by National Treasury. They are costing the NDP in relation to higher education and the white paper. Now, the costing, they are doing it in this way. They are saying, if we can maintain what we are providing now and the existing plans, how much is that? But if we are to increase what we have in terms of what the white paper says and the NDP, how much is that? And the 2 things are very different. But those are the 2 processes that are being done by the National Treasury working with us so that we can answer that question even more authoritatively as to what would that require. The third process we are doing, we are finalizing our own National Post-School Education and Training Plan. These treasury processes also are helping us greatly in actually finalizing our plan, because we want to go to detail, ideally even when it comes to TVET colleges and community colleges, to say what should happen in each district, municipality, over how long, and how much would that, what would that require? Precisely because we want not to create false expectations, and also to be able to say, well, as you say, Advocate Ali, maybe we planned during good times. It wasn't great of times, but maybe we were optimistic the economy will grow by 3-4%. That is actually not happening. Certainly, we do need to educate our population about these realities and what they mean, including our students. You know, to say that sometimes we must distinguish between a wish and what is realistic. It's very important to actually do that. But that's the work that we are doing. I don't know when we're going to finish it through you, Judge. DG, we're going to finish that work. Because ideally, it would have been good to share some of it with the Commission, you know, so that also, for background maybe even, you know. Yeah, that's, yeah. We are hoping, well, our plan will be finished by March, the department's post-school education and training plan. I'm not sure about the Treasury one, exercise, by March as well.
They haven't pronounced.
Okay, they haven't pronounced it. But I just thought that for what it's worth, let me share that.
Thank you. That's very useful. Thank you, Minister. We'll follow up with the DG, of course. Just the second last issue I wanted to raise with you, Minister. Maybe you can just share with us your understanding of the notion of institutional autonomy, public accountability, and academic freedom.
Yeah. No, thanks. When we adopted White Paper 3 that I referred to earlier on higher education in 1997, I remember that very well because I was chairperson of the portfolio committee at the time on education. We said, well, firstly, our constitution, let me put it that way. The constitution in 1996 protected academic freedom, not institutional autonomy, by the way. Protected academic freedom. And then we said as a country, if we are to really, in the South African context, given where we were at the time and given our history, if we are to achieve true academic freedom, we need institutional autonomy. But institutional autonomy on its own is a necessary but not sufficient condition to realize academic freedom. Especially given our history, we need to balance it with public accountability. These are public institutions. They must account on what they do and not just say they will do what they like because they are autonomous. The reason for that, the reasons for that were many. I'm just going to mention, well, I have mentioned some that it's because of our own history. But the reality also is that we were afraid that given our own history, certain institutions will use their autonomy not to pursue academic freedom, but to suppress academic freedom. It's been proven the world over, by the way, that institutional autonomy can be used to suppress academic freedom. In our case also, we were scared that institutional autonomy was going to be used to pursue or to block transformation. To say we are autonomous, you're not going to tell us as government what to do, it's going to be business as usual in our institutions. So that is why we then balance that with public accountability. The mechanisms that we set at that time have been continuously under review. Just like now, this year, was it this year we passed this legislation, the amendment to the Higher Education Act this year, to actually further clarify these matters. Part of the clarification now was to say, by the way, actually, if you balance the two things, the minister is given now in law the powers to set transformation goals. That doesn't mean you interfere with institutional autonomy, but transformation goals can also be set by the minister. So to us, the two things always go together, which is our own innovative way of trying to deal with both our past and the way that we want to move forward. But also my own view now, this is not government's view, possibly it is. My own view is that you also cannot have full academic freedom in the context of untransformed curricula. Because it's freedom to learn things that do not take us forward. That is now the issue, by the way, that is raised by the students quite sharply. That's why I wish they could go back to class and we could have negotiations and have debates and discussions about what we mean about curriculum transformation, especially also given where we come from. They are beginning to raise these things. They are talking about decolonization. All those are things that have a bearing on all these three issues you're talking about: public accountability, institutional autonomy, and academic freedom. Frankly, that's the kind of debate I would also like to see being elevated in our country, in our institutions, as part of shaping this kind of South Africa we want to have.
Now that you mentioned the word, Minister, maybe you can help us understand, just from your own perspective, what does decolonization mean and what would it require?
Or would you need another week, Minister?
No, Advocate. In fact, the way I would answer that, that's why we need a debate, because I'm not sure whether we are talking, or even the students, they read from the same, they sing from the same hymn book when they talk decolonization. I've said to them I would like to have a chance to sit down and we have a debate so that I can understand better what is meant by decolonization. It seems obvious at one level, but at another level, it's not very clear, at least to me. It's an ideological debate as well, by the way. It's an ideological debate because from different ideological perspectives, it has different shades of meaning. But it's an important issue. It's been placed on the table and then it must be engaged and be debated. And not do like some of our students, not all of them do. You have to accept decolonization. It's a demand. Say, yes, I accept decolonization, but I say I can't do that as a minister. You have to engage me. You have to persuade me. You have to tell me, what does that mean? We could have a very constructive debate, actually, as a country around that.
And then just in the context of institutional autonomy, Minister, can you tell us the proposed fee regulation, whether or not that will impede institutional autonomy?
No, Judge, it won't impact because we have had an agreement with the universities. It's not something that we have imposed as government. We said because this matter of fees, by the way, it has always been sensitive. That it has reached this level, it doesn't mean that it starts now. I mentioned one area where there are problems with fees earlier. Differential increases by various universities. There's one problem area. But the other problem area that we have had as government is that we increase NSFAS by 6%, but on average the fees rise by 8%, which means we are chasing a moving target that we will never reach. That was part of our own frustration as government, because it means now we'll always be on a deficit. You increase NSFAS, but we take fewer students, we assist fewer students. That has been another area. But also, the vice chancellors themselves, fortunately, realized that this is a very politically sensitive issue. And then said, no, let's agree that we must have a framework. Now, that is why I gave that to the CHE. That framework, ideally, we are not looking at a government framework. We are looking at a framework and a methodology to arrive at a framework that would be accepted by everyone in the sector. That's why we've asked the CHE. Then the CHE is going to come back with the proposals to say, this is how we propose that we regulate the fees. The fact that I announced last year that not more than 6%, which then became Nzimande resolution when all of us had agreed together with the student leadership There was a 6% increase, by the way, this year, except that it was all absorbed by government. So, 2017, when I made that announcement, I made it clear, Judge, that it's a recommendation coming out of the exercise that was done by the CHE. Although the CHE had recommended a particular figure, but I decided then on through consultations, by the way. But it's for university councils to then make a decision, because legally, fees at universities are determined by university councils. So the university, theoretically, it's possible that one university may say, no, we don't accept this recommendation by the minister. It would be within their powers. We are going to increase fees by 10%, for instance. Or maybe for another university to say, no, okay, I can increase by up to 8%, but in the discussions and my council, we're going to increase by less than 8%. So it's the universities that are going. I'm glad also you're asking this, because sometimes I'm accused of usurping the powers. Why are you announcing for the councils? When I clarify, I say no, but it's councils who are going to take decisions. Then other groupings, especially students, said, yeah, we are passing the buck now. Why don't we instruct the universities? By how much are they going to be increasing? I can't do that. So I haven't usurped. It's a consensus position that has been reached by the sector to say, let's have this framework. I'm looking forward actually to the proposals of the CHE. And the sooner we have them, we are closer to the deadline that I gave them, the better. And I'm sure that also, by the way, the sooner we get these, the Commission will have to have a look at.
Thank you, Minister. Just the final topic which I wanted to deal with is that we've heard from many students in set one of our hearings that the African National Congress had in both Polokwane and Mangaung took resolutions that they would roll out fee-free higher education and training for all. And that's the basis of the demand that they must now fulfill their promises made. Do you have any comment on that, on the resolutions made in relation to higher education and training at both Polokwane and Mangaung?
Thank you. In fact, I want to, well, if perhaps I can speak a bit more authoritatively if it's about the ANC. Going back to the Freedom Charter, which, by the way, wasn't an ANC document only. It's a document that was adopted by a whole range of other organizations. The Freedom Charter does not talk about free higher education. I'm sure now by this time as the Commission you should have looked at it, because I'm sure there have been, Judge, lots of debates and arguments. Because it's actually very clear. In fact, you know, it's interesting. My own interpretation is that the Freedom Charter was much more cautious than later documents of the ANC about higher education, especially for a developing country like ours. Can we close 10, is it? The doors of learning and culture shall be open. If you are, just be patient with me a bit, Judge. Yeah, just go down a little bit. There is that paragraph. Yes, you can stop there. It says education shall be free, compulsory, universal, and equal for all children. Then it says higher education and technical training. Now, that's my mandate at the moment. Shall be opened to all by means of state allowances and scholarships awarded on the basis of merit. So there's no free there. It says accessible to all, but is based on merit, and also it's through state allowances and scholarships. That's what NSFAS has done. Actually, NSFAS has met this. Then, if you go to Polokwane and Mangaung, I think there's one document that's circulating in social media, Judge.
Just sorry, Minister, before you proceed.
Yes.
On the next slide, it talks about adult
Yes. Oh, okay.
literacy.
Adult illiteracy, yes.
I wanted to check if that must.
But that's not adult education.
It's adult literacy.
It's adult illiteracy. That's adult illiteracy. By state, it shall be done through state what? Mass state. That's what Karigude is. Now, that is run by basic education.
Yes.
Adult illiteracy shall be ended by a mass state education plan. That's what Karigude has done. And in fact, Karigude has done very well. We have gone very far now as a country towards eliminating illiteracy. But that's not adult education. It's illiteracy, R-A-E-O-O. Now, Mangaung and you see, there is a document that is circulating in social media which talks about for all. What it refers to, it only points out that for all in the body of that resolution is not looking at the title of the resolution which says free higher education for the poor. So all in that instance refers to all insofar as it means the poor. It's not everybody. So there is no resolution that talks about free higher education for all in the African National Congress. At least also I was part of both the Polokwane Conference and the Mangaung Conference. And in the Mangaung Conference, I was in the Education Commission, which drafted, which discussed that resolution. I think that if people want to say that there must be free higher education for all, yeah, there you are. Implementing higher education says implementing free higher education for the poor in South Africa. So where all comes in refers to the poor. For free education to all undergraduate level students will be finalized for adoption before the end of 2013. For those who are poor. We must admit, we were a bit optimistic because we already had or we were going to receive that report on fee-free higher education, Judge. That's why that resolution was optimistic, that it must be adopted before the end of 2013, a plan to roll out free higher education for the poor.
But Minister, I think the difficulty comes in the articulation of the resolution, because the resolution is not confined to the poor. It just says the policy for free higher education to all undergraduate level students will be finalized for adoption before the end of 2013.
But what I'm saying, Judge, is that might have been drafting. Look at the title. It says implementing free higher education for the poor in South Africa. And those are sub-paragraphs of that topic. I don't think I'm playing with words. It's just drafting. Maybe English in that instance, you see, from the part of those who are drafting. But it's very clear that it's for the poor.
So your argument is, having a look at that paragraph, you've got to read it with the subtitle, which gives context to it, and therefore never ever meant free education for all.
Absolutely, Judge.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have no further questions. I'd just like to check with the rest of the evidence leading team if there are any other questions. We've got no further questions, Chair.
None, Judge.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your time and the labour that's gone into this and your very clear presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Judge and Commissioners and evidence leaders.
Chairperson, if I may just indicate that the Minister's written response, which we've been working through today, is far more comprehensive than what he's managed to present orally because of time constraints. And we're in the process of marking up all exhibits. So we would ask that the written document be marked as an exhibit and that the contents therefore form part of the record of the Commission.
Yes, by all means.
But we will put an index of exhibit numbers before
That
you
will be most
shortly.
helpful. Thank you. By all means, feel free to go as soon as you like. Thank you. No, you're waiting for nobody.
What time are we starting tomorrow? Doesn't Commission get to say?
I don't know. I'll ask her now. It's the Appropriations Committee.
Tomorrow's a